This is a talk about people, but before I started talking about it, I wanted to put some of the technical stuff that we've been talking about in context. 20 years ago yesterday, NCSA Mosaic was released. So we actually have come rather a long way in a very short time. And I bow to all of the people in this room who do a whole bunch of the technical and so on security. It's fantastic, and to a certain extent beyond what I do. I'm very impressed, and it's been a privilege to hear a lot of the things that have been going on today. So I'm going to talk about possibly something slightly different. I wanted to talk about trust, and like Murad, when I was asked to do this, I thought, oh, I need to put a title together and an abstract together and so on, and probably what I'm going to talk about is slightly different from what's in the abstract, so let's see. I wanted to remind myself, as well as everybody else, why we were here, because I like the optimistic outlook side of things. So yes, we have a whole bunch of interesting problems, and yes, there are challenges ahead, but strangely enough, people seem to manage quite well to push forwards despite all of this. Despite having a whole bunch of catastrophes in the way and massive failures in the way, as we heard about yesterday, we're still moving forwards. And I think that the future can be at least as optimistic as we make it. So this is where we're going. And I have a rule for you. This is Steve's first rule of computing. All computing is for people and about people. There is no exception to this rule. At some point, people are involved or touched by the stuff that we do with the systems that we create or with the systems that we use. This is true now, and it's going to be true in the future. We may well have autonomous systems that can do all kinds of amazing things, which maybe even remove people from certain equations, but people are going to be involved somewhere. So this is the, if you like, the thing that drives me and the research that I do as it goes forwards. Now, yesterday, our colleague from The Hague talked about the global conference on cyberspace. I wanted to give you a couple of quotes from the chair's statement at the end of that conference, because trust is mentioned in quite a few of these. So what have we got? The internet-based economy has a bright future, which is nice to know, provided that conditions are in place such as trust, education, policy frameworks, and so on. It's good that people are recognizing these things, right? Innovation and economic growth will depend on factors such as access to capital, skilled workforce, and not least the trust of end users. This kind of thing makes me very happy, by the way, because it keeps talking about trust. And I can use it in my grant applications, which is never a bad thing, right? And a peaceful cyberspace provides us with many opportunities. The potential for malicious cyber activities, not only by criminals, but also by state actors, creates instability, right? We heard yesterday about governance and failures and so on. It's worth remembering that these things are problems. Not to mention, so Global Commission on Internet Governance. These things are all related, by the way. You may have spotted that. Confidence has to be restored in the internet. Restoring trust, enhancing confidence is the way forwards. Are we seeing a pattern yet? And finally, hopefully, the internet society has to weigh in. So we're great. Real security on the internet can only be realized within a broader context of trust and respect of fundamental human rights. It isn't by any means satisfactory to start thinking about taking away rights in order to protect people. It doesn't work that way. The internet is probably the biggest social experiment we've ever created, and it's still ongoing. But it's good to recognize that things like trust and human rights are fundamental aspects of how all of this thing works. and I'm a bit of a socialist, so I read The Guardian. So they also said, they weighed in on this as well, and said that trust and confidence are odd things to talk about when you're thinking about technical aspects, such as how the internet works, cybersecurity, so on and so forth, because we really don't trust things like computers. At which point I can either stop talking and leave the room, or we can move forwards and say, actually, that's not true, because we do these kind of things every day. We do think about trust when we are using the systems that we use, all of the time. Does anybody here, apart from me, ever talk to the computer, by the way? Like shout at it, perhaps? I don't know. We, as has been found many, many years ago by Reeves and Nass in the media equation work that they did, anthropomorphize the technology that we use, okay? So anthropomorphization basically allows us to interact with that technology in interesting ways that are meaningful to us. This is where I'm coming from, and this is where the trust stuff comes in. So a small leap of faith is required to say, because we anthropomorphize technology, we can start thinking about how we trust technology and how technology trusts us. So people think about trust all the time. Without it, none of us would be here. Okay, societies don't work if trust isn't extant. The internet, no less. From my point of view, in the work that I do, devices, the tools we create, the interfaces that we create, they all can think about trust too. They think about trusting the people that are using them as well as each other. So when we think about some of the work that we've done in the Internet of Things, trust comes into how information gets shared around devices as much as it does between person and device. For the record, I don't for 1 second subscribe to the point of view that people are a weakest link in a security chain. If we start subscribing to that link and talking about people in that way, users in that way, we're basically alienating the very people that we want to protect. Doesn't work, okay? We have to start getting out of that mindset and start thinking about how we can make people stronger by helping them with the things they're good at, one of which, from my point of view, can you guess, is trust. So, what on earth is trust? From my point of view, we've got, there are a whole bunch of different definitions of trust. I'm going to give you one that works here. It's a subjective probability. In other words, it's something that we internally decide on in circumstances of ambiguity, where we don't know all of the answers, where we don't have control. And thank you very much, Murad, for talking about lack of control in the last couple of slides that you had, because it makes my job a bit easier. We're losing control, by the way, and users are losing control in the systems that they use. And so at this point, trust comes into play. And when all of these things excuse me, are satisfied, there is risk. When there is a risk involved, the only thing you can start thinking about is trust. What the difference between trust and security comes in quite interestingly there. What security tries to do, and in a number of cases succeeds for at least a period of time or in a space, is control things, to remove aspects of risk. When we remove risk, we remove the need to trust. When risk exists, there is a need to start thinking about trust. So trust and security, to actually address the thing that talks about in my abstract, are related, possibly two sides of the same coin, but they come to their conclusions slightly differently. From my point of view, what we're looking at is a situation where people cannot necessarily control the systems that they're using, let alone understand the systems that they're using, at which point we have to have the systems encourage people to think about trust, accept the risk that is involved with using them, and make those risks clear. So I got to this point in the talk, and I thought to myself, hang on a minute, this is supposed to be a session on technical solutions, right? And so far, I've given you social stuff, which is great, but I'm not sure if social is technical. So I wanted to give you, and I think I've got a few minutes, a few of the things that I have been doing in the past, I don't know, 10, 20 years, that address all of these things that I've just given you to think about, the social stuff. Small list: Computational Trust and the siblings that it has, Trust Enablement and Foreground Trust, Device Comfort, Intelligent Information, and we have 10 commandments because everybody needs commandments, right? So, Computational Trust, a long, long time ago, I was reading somebody's, I was in multi-agent systems for my PhD, and I was reading somebody's PhD thesis, and it said, it's absolutely imperative that the agents trust each other. And I thought, what does that mean? And nobody could give me an answer, so I thought I might as well just find one for myself. So I took a whole bunch of philosophical, psychological, sociological stuff about trust, put it all together and formalized it so that computers could use it. They take evidence, they estimate, or they do some risk estimation, so on and so forth, and they come up with two questions, or answers to two questions. How much trust do you have, and how much trust do you need in a given situation? Because trust is contextual, right? The systems then make decisions about what to do based on the answers to these two questions, which we can give numbers to. I'm not going to get too technical because, quite frankly, I could, but then it would be less interesting than listening to the rest of this talk. So what we want to do is understand trust better and how it fits in technical solutions. We want to deploy it in these solutions, and we want to define it better so that it works. There are lots and lots of definitions of trust and lots of areas where it works, by the way. This is just one of them. Computational trust is, if you like, a sibling of things like interpersonal trust, which works between humans. Since doing all of that work, a whole bunch of different trust models have become available, and a quick search on the internet will give you trust models for ad hoc networking, trust models for financial decision-making, trust models for entrepreneurial decision-making, supported by computational systems. Okay, so it's work ongoing, and it's a growing field, and the great thing about it is that cybersecurity researchers, shall we say, are beginning to recognize trust as something important. If you look at any trust or any security-related conference, call for papers, etc., trust is in there somewhere. Okay, the stuff that we heard about yesterday, just about every talk, trust was a part of what they were talking about. So it's becoming more important, it's becoming more recognized. This is good. So it's great to have a model of trust, but where do you put it? One of the things that I've been doing with a colleague, Natasha Dwyer, in Victoria University in Australia, focuses on what we call trust enablement and foreground trust. So trust enablement is an interesting one because the idea behind it is to gather evidence and just give it to the decision maker, from which they take whatever makes sense to them in order to make trust decisions. Okay? Works with people, that's what Natasha was doing. We started applying it to computational systems, the strength of which is that it's not necessary for anybody outside of the system to know what parts of the evidence are used in order to make the decisions. So it's more difficult, if you like, to predict behaviors or to attack the model, because one of the problems with trust models is, of course, that you can game them. Credit card companies have been spying that for years. So we've applied that in what we call foreground trust, which is a human-computer interaction model, which takes, gathers evidence to enable the users of systems to think about trust by just giving them the evidence and allowing them to make their decisions about the systems that they're using, okay? Trying to figure out what evidence makes sense to them, giving it to them so that they can be more comfortable using the system. Speaking of comfort, a few years ago, I started getting worried about things like sexting, with teenagers sending naughty pictures of themselves to people that they not necessarily, or they probably shouldn't. Okay, it's a problem. It's also a problem that people share perhaps more than they should, or people do things with these crazy mobile devices that everybody's got now that perhaps they shouldn't be doing, or perhaps they shouldn't be doing right now. Okay, so we came up with a model of comfort, which we've embedded in devices, which allows the device to use any of the context that it can find, including things like location, usage, applications that are being used when, who's around, and so on and so forth, things that the device can sense, to allow it to come up with a measure of its own comfort in that situation, which then allows the device to give advice on its comfort to the user by perhaps saying, maybe you shouldn't be sending this picture to that person. Maybe you shouldn't be checking your bank details on this network. Maybe you shouldn't be doing this right now. I'm not very comfortable. Maybe we shouldn't be doing this here. Okay? The measure of comfort and how it's calculated, again, we can go into that. It's less important than the effect that it has on the people that are using it, which is what we're experimenting with now that we've got some ethical approval to do so. For any constitutional monarchists amongst you, what device comfort does is advise, encourage, and warn the people that are using it. So trust is useful in all of those kind of things, how people interact with devices and technology, and how technology interacts with itself and others. It's also useful when you think about how information gets shared in and around networks of people, devices, and so on, either within things like the Internet of Things, or with ad hoc networking, or with just the mobile devices that we all use. A long time ago, I came up with the idea of wrapping information with agents and sending it around networks to people who are interested in it. The next step of that was to insert trust into the equation so that the information only shared itself with the people who were trusted. It also only shares itself with people who are trusted to perhaps share it with others. So the trust model stays with the information and allows it to make decisions about its life cycle as it moves. I think there are obvious implications for things like privacy and hopefully personal security in all of this, so I'm not going to belabor the fact. But so all of this kind of stuff, if you're interested, feel free to ask me about afterwards, or I'm happy to talk. But the real focus, as I said, of this talk is on people. So if we don't design, this is about the future optimistic stuff, yeah? We need to design systems that are people-oriented and acknowledge the fact that Steve's first law, or whoever's first law you want to call it, is valid in the systems of the future, okay? Because if we don't think about people, it doesn't work, which is why things like privacy by design are such powerful concepts, because the point is people are the first consideration, yeah? So what we really want to do is create privacy, trust, security models where people understand where they fit, okay? And people have a part to play in the tools that they use. I don't think that we've been that great at doing that so far, but we're getting better. So we came up with 10 commandments for security and trust models. And I think they're really great, and feel free to use them. So here's how it works. I've already told you what number one is. Make the systems that you make creating work for people. Make the people the most important thing in the consideration. The second part, and this isn't to say that things like cryptography aren't important, as we're going to hear in a minute, I think. They're probably the underpinnings of the systems that we all use. If we don't have security as a foundation of all of the things that we're using, I don't think we're going to be able to get to this stage. But it's not good enough to create systems that people don't understand. So at the very least, we need to be able to explain it to people so that they can get it. If they don't get it, why would they bother to use it? We should be able to support people. That's not just us, the experts, but real, honest-to-goodness people walking up and down the street, monitoring what's going on, understanding what decisions get made and why they get made. We should be able to support them getting involved with the decisions that get made. So the device comfort stuff, it gives advice. It says, perhaps you shouldn't do this, but it doesn't stop you from doing it because really it's your life. Yeah, it's your decision. We can stop people from doing it at some point, by the way, but we don't want to fail silently. We don't want to have solutions which say everything's great and then fail and forget to tell the people who are using them. We do that all the time. It doesn't work, right? We want to make systems that are configurable by the people that use them. This is what I want. This is how I want it to work. We want to be able to make systems which answer questions when they're asked. We want to be able to make systems which cater for different time priorities and different outlooks. We've heard a little bit about culture in the past couple of days. It's probably more important than any of us realize. Recognizing and understanding that people come from different cultures, even when they're within the same country, for instance, or the same group or whatever, is a major step forward in having systems that can support those people. We need to allow for incompleteness, which is to say that we don't always have all of the information, but we still need to do stuff. We still need to make decisions, and so do the tools and the devices that we create. So we need to be able to make decisions in those impossible situations, if you like. And to do that, there's nothing better than at making decisions in impossible situations than people, right? So supporting people to make those decisions is what makes sense. Foster a relationship with the users, the people who are using the devices, so that they can get involved and do all of the 1 to 8 stuff. And make sure that right at the start, everybody understands what the risks are that are involved. So informed consent, if you like. Those are my 10 commandments. Those are the things that I try to work with in all of the stuff and the techniques and tools that I create. And we're done. So here is a list of, isn't that strange? That's probably not what that slide should look like. I'm going to read it to you. So isn't that weird? So if I look at the little thing at the side here that says what the next slide's going to be, I can see it. So I'm going to read it to you. It says, there is no future for people without thinking about people. Okay? Cyber anything is people-oriented, and the way people think about it and trust it is key. Security has to be people-oriented too, okay? And how people think about trust related to that is key. Just because it's hard doesn't make it impossible, and just because people do it doesn't make it weak, or indeed strong. But we need to get out of that mindset. And the last point is at the bottom there. You can't do it without trust. So I'm hopefully in the job for the next 20, 30 years. We're good. Thanks very much.